a great game or what? We are at the Povich Center at University of Maryland. I'm with Hall of Famer and alumni of University of Maryland, Tim Kurkjian. I'm his son, Jeff Kurkjian, for our final regular season episode of Is This a Great Game or What?
And usually I wear my Walter Johnson fleece pullover for these, but today, University of Maryland, I've got my University of Maryland hoodie on here. So this is going to be the day that we're doing this at Maryland. I graduated here in 1978. This is our 33rd podcast of the year, and each episode we mention the greatest baseball player ever to wear number whatever it is. So this is number 33. Eddie Murray, former Oriole, is the greatest number 33 of all time. I covered him with the Orioles for 4 years, more than that actually. Mark Hyman, who runs the Povich Center, also covered him in 1986. And I can't tell you how many times Eddie would just like shush us away when we went to talk to him. So the first time I went to spring training in 86 to cover the Orioles for the Baltimore Sun. Floyd Rayford, who's on the Orioles, is on the plane going to Florida. So Floyd Rayford looks at me and I say, Floyd, I'm Tim Kurkjian. I'm going to be covering the team this year. He takes one look at me and he goes, Eddie is going to hate you. And I said, why? He said, your head is too big for the rest of your body. Well, I have a really little body. I understand that, but I have a 7 1/8 head. I don't have a big head. But now I'm all worried going on the plane to cover spring training for the first time that my head is too big for the rest of my body, and Eddie is going to hate me for that. Well, he ended up hating me, maybe not for that, but this is what we go through as journalists.
Yeah, and you can tell that this is not... He wears this sweatshirt all the time around the house, and he has a big stain on the front. He just realized... that he has. And you brought up Walter Johnson. We have a listener on our show. His name's Carl. He is a big fan of the show. And anytime Walter Johnson comes up on the show, my dad sarcastically says, hey, did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School? And it's the same, like we all have dads and moms out that make the same joke all the time. Well, Carl loved it so much he made a shirt out of it. Did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School? And I don't know where he got your signature there, right. But he somehow got that off the internet.
And it's become an inside joke on Baseball Tonight and all the games that I do with Carl Ravitch. I just do this to irritate him. He's better when he's irritated. I always say, did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School? And he just rolls his eyes. Now he'll say to me on the air, he'll say, Tim, did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School? It's a running joke, and somebody liked it enough that we have a T-shirt for it.
Well, and it's fitting to be here because, Dad, you and I are both Montgomery County, Maryland products. I went to Quince Orchard High School. You went to?
Walter Johnson High School.
Didn't
I worked
even
for
know
the
that.
school paper. It was called The Pitch. I did some work for the yearbook. It was called The Wind Up. Yeah. So.
And we have a good counsel. In this, any other Montgomery County products in the back there? Yeah, where'd you go to high school? You went to Quince Orchard. QO, let's go. And... wow.
WJ represented. How about that?
We'll have to talk QO after. Go Cougars.
So the green fleece that I wear all the time, which I didn't wear today because I'm at Maryland, Todd Frazier, who does all the Little League games with me, says, that's the greatest shirt I've ever seen. I got to have one of those. So after the Little League World Series was over, I went to WJ and I got him a fleece pullover that said Walter Johnson Wildcats on it. It's an extra large, unlike mine. And I sent it to him. I've never seen him so happy in my life. So Todd Frazier has a WJ pullover. How about that?
And this is just to go, if you want to get to know my dad a little bit better. A lot of people, he's a celebrity, he's a Hall of Famer, that's how people view him. But he's so humble. He went to Walter Johnson High School, drove there, went to their school shop and just bought a sweatshirt and then mailed it to him to make sure he had it. Not, hey, can you guys help me out and hook me up? Nope, he just went and bought it himself, which is just the kind of guy you are.
Well, that's the guy that Todd Frazier is. He's the biggest 12-year-old in the history of the world. He was one of our best guests this year because this is what we attempted to do. We wanted to tap into Todd Frazier, who played Little League Baseball and won the championship at age 12. We want that guy talking to us. We don't want to talk to him about the home run that he hit off of Roger Clemens in 2015. We're not interested in that. We're interested in the Little League World Series of Todd Frazier telling us what it was like to be there. And that was what we've tried to do with every interview here, is get the people to explain to us what we want to hear from them.
Yeah, and at the end of this interview, usually at this time we say, oh, our guest today is, whoever it is, whether it's Johnny Bench, Cal Ripken Jr., we're going to kind of turn it around here and have the students here at the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism ask us the questions. So, Dad, in fact, we are the guests on our own podcast here.
And you're going to be asking the questions, and just ask as many as you like. No matter what you like, we're going to go through them.
And so we're going to get to that, of course. And, Dad, obviously, we have to talk about the World Series, which wrapped up now when this releases almost a week ago because of only 5 games in the World Series. So we're going to get there, of course. But I want to talk a little bit about your favorite moments from the podcast this season.
Well, favorite moments from the podcast this year. We had Scott Van Pelt on, former Maryland graduate, of course, and he does the Baltimore better than anyone in the world. So we laughed for 35 straight minutes. I told it, and Scott comes in from the beach. He's at the beach. He's on vacation, but he walks off the beach. He's got suntan lotion all over him. He's got a visor on. And we just talked about the long O and Orioles baseball and everything else for at least 35 minutes. And we laughed out loud for the entire time. A good lesson here. You're allowed to have a good chuckle when you're covering sports. No matter what you're doing, you should have a good chuckle. So Scott Van Pelt was one of my favorites. The other thing was I asked a bunch of questions on the air just to try to get people to talk about some other part of their life. So we had 2 guests in a row, Cal Ripken and Ryan Zimmerman. And I asked Cal Ripken, when's the last time you dunked a basketball? And 5 minutes later, he sends us a picture of him dunking a basketball. That's how proud he was that he could still dunk it. Then I asked Ryan Zimmerman, I said, when's the last time you dunked a basketball? And he said, at my
Fantasy football draft.
He said there was a bet that I couldn't dunk it anymore. So I went out in my backyard and I dunked it and I won the bet. And then he sent us a video of him dunking a basketball. So here's a Hall of Fame baseball player and the greatest national of all time. And all they care about is making sure that we know that they could still dunk a basketball.
And it took us a little bit of prying with Cal Ripken's people to allow us to use the photo he sent in the YouTube version of the podcast because his shorts were rather short at that time. Right. That was the style. And he said, I don't know if I want that out on the internet. And we said, please, it's a perfect moment of the podcast. Right. One of my favorite moments, we had Jeff Francoeur on the podcast, who's a longtime Atlanta Braves player, really, really great athlete. And he talked a lot about golf. We talked to him a lot about playing golf. And one of the best stories of all time was he was in spring training. Bobby Cox is the manager, and he's still young. He's still coming up. So he's grinding every day to get a spot on that team. And Bobby Cox finds out that Jeff Francoeur passed on the opportunity to play golf with Tiger Woods. Passed on it. Said, nope. And I see you might have seen the clip on Instagram. Very, very humble brag here. It blew up on our Instagram page. I'm the one who runs the social media, and I have no clue what I'm doing. And all of a sudden I wake up, we've got 1 million views on this story. And so at Great Gamer What, you can follow us. Feel free to take out your phones now. I'm totally fine with that. But Bobby Cox hears that he passed on an opportunity to play golf with Tiger Woods. And so Bobby Cox said, no, you got to go. And he said, no, listen, Skip, I'm staying here. I'm playing. He says, okay, how about this? If you put a ball in play, when you make it to first base, maybe just grab your ankle a little bit right when you run through first, and we'll pull you out of the game, and we can see if you can make it for the round. Lo and behold, he hits a ball, runs through first base, grabs his ankle. Bobby Cox comes waddling out, his words, not mine, and says, takes a look at it, pulls him out of the game, and he immediately runs to the clubhouse, puts on his golf outfit, and meets Tiger Woods on the first fairway and played 18 holes with Tiger Woods. And the best part was on the 17th hole, Jeff Francoeur gets a text message from his wife. It's a screenshot that says, it's a report from ESPN, and it says, Jeff Francoeur, day-to-day with a high ankle sprain. And secretly she knows.
He wasn't even hurt, and the manager allowed him to do this. So Jeff Francoeur told us that's the first time he's ever told that story publicly, and he chose to tell it on our podcast. I saw him at the playoffs, and I said, Frenchie, that was, of all the things we did on our podcast, that was the highlight, was your story on Bobby Cox. And he goes, I've never gotten that kind of reaction on anything that I've ever done. That story, just completely blew up. That's the point. We asked him a question about playing golf with Tiger Woods. And that's the story we got. So when you're out there talking to people, let's see if we can ask a question that might elicit a different response, a funny response. I had no idea about this story, but that's what we got from Jeff.
And usually, Dad, you do, in his years of covering the sport, he knows a story that he wants a guy to tell and has a question that leads him to it to make him feel comfortable. But he offered this up, and it was like the back half of the interview. So we didn't even open with this, and it was one of our favorite moments of this season.
There were so many favorite moments. Johnny Bench sang for us, the greatest catcher of all time, sang for us. Todd Frazier, who sings like Frank Sinatra, even though he's 12 years old, he sang for us on the podcast also. And what else? What other takeaways did you have from the podcast?
Oh, Aaron Boone was unbelievable doing the voice of the Phillies, Dan Baker, or the PA announcer, and it was for the Phillies.
Right. Oh,
and it's just so funny to think you can be as good of an athlete as Aaron Boone is, as good of a manager as Aaron Boone is, but still be able to do some of the best impressions of announcers, or he does everybody's batting stance from when his dad was playing.
And he did Moses Malone from the free throw line, which you guys are too young to understand that. Moses Malone was supposed to come to this school in 1974. That's the year I was a freshman at Merrill. And in one of my classes, Psych 100, he had come so close to enrolling that they announced the roll before one of the classes, Moses Malone, and someone had to say, he just signed with the Utah Stars. He's not coming here. But it was announced in a class. But Aaron Boone did Moses Malone at the free throw line, and I was crying with laughter. And when we're done with this, at least a dozen people said to me, I had no idea that Aaron Boone had that good of a sense of humor. And it's in part because we brought it out of him. We told him, we don't want to ask you any questions about being the Yankees manager. You get asked those every day. We want to ask you about what you were like when you were 5 years old, and it worked.
One of my buddies, lifelong Boston Red Sox fan, and he called me after the Aaron Boone episode, and pardon my language because he's from Boston, so this is how they talk all the time, and he said, gosh, Aaron Boone was hilarious, and I f***ing hate him. I was like, wow. So even a guy who hates Aaron Boone is saying, even I hate him and he was hilarious.
So you remember the ice bucket challenge, right? I did one of these with Booney, and I had ice water thrown all over me. So Aaron Boone, I challenge him to do it the next time. He's on the road with me. We're in Boston, and he goes to the barkeep, because you have to do it within 24 hours. He goes to the young barkeep at the hotel and says, will you pour cold water over my head for the ice bucket challenge? And the kid, who's the bartender, goes, well, of course I will. You're Aaron Boone. I hate your guts. So he poured it over him on the day of a game. This is what we got from our podcast, just by asking a question that's a little bit different than, when's Garrett Cole coming off the injured list? That's the goal.
And you have so many places you can get that, especially with the availability of information, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on ESPN or MLB, you can find that information. It's the stories that really stick, like the one with Jeff Francoeur, like the one with Cal Ripken. All of these are available on our podcast. You guys can rewind back and listen to that. So, Dad, let's open it up.
Well, we're going to do a couple takeaways first from the World Series. Freddie Freeman had one of the greatest World Series ever. I'm not sure there's a way around that. He's the only player ever to hit a home run in the first 4 games of any World Series. Counting the previous World Series, he's the only player ever to hit a home run in 6 straight World Series games. He drove in 12 runs in 5 games, tying the record for the most RBIs in one World Series. Bobby Richardson had 12 in 1962, but he did it in 7 games. And of course, he hit the only walk-off grand slam in the history of the World Series. That came in Game 1. And what happened to you the other day at church?
Oh, well, our audience spans from journalism students like yourselves all the way up to some of my mom's friends at church. And one of the very sweet ladies who's been going to our church for 40 years and I've known since I was a baby comes up and says, Freddie Freeman hit a walk-off home run, and now I know what that is because you told me.
She'd been listening to the podcast, and so she knew what a walk-off home run was, and I was so pleased that we were able to educate her on that. This is the way it works. I was in the, years ago, I was in the frozen food aisle at the Safeway, and this woman from the neighborhood tackles me in the frozen food aisle and goes, "Oh my gosh, I love the Nationals. I watch every game. I watch every pitch. I can't miss it. I love it so much." She said, "I just started watching." She said, "This is how you felt your whole life, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, this is how I felt my entire life." She goes, "I'm so envious. I finally figured it out." She said, "I'm 55 years old, and now I love baseball. And this is what this is all about."
And, speaking to journalism students, my dad and I were both watching Game 3 of the World Series, and we release the podcast every Tuesday morning. And it can be tough. I host a morning radio show, so I stay up as late as I can during these games, and if it's a blowout, I'll go to bed in the 8th inning and hope that something crazy doesn't happen, and sometimes it does. But we had to record our podcast before Game 3 in order for it to be ready for our midnight release right after, because we didn't have the time to produce it and put it all together, and quite frankly, with a 14-month-old baby at home, I'm not getting much sleep as is. So, Freddie Freeman hits his now 6th straight World Series game home run going back to 2021 with the Braves. Now, he holds the record for most consecutive games with a home run in a World Series. And immediately, in effort of getting it right, as we do as sports journalists, I run downstairs and edit the portion where I had said, hey, he now ties the record for 5 straight games with a home run, and was able to edit it in time for the podcast to come out. Thank God it happened in the first inning, though. I don't think I would have gotten it otherwise.
Jeff is a magician with the technology. It's really important because I'm the worst of all time at it, and that's why it works, is that we have a guy who understands all of this. All right, the other takeaway was, how poorly the Yankees played in Game 5 of the World Series. It's one of the greatest World Series games I've ever seen, and one of the worst World Series games I've ever seen at the same time. That 5th inning, the ball that Aaron Judge dropped, he catches with his eyes closed 99 out of 100 times. The ball that Anthony Volpe messed up at shortstop, he is a great defensive shortstop, but made a poor decision, then made a terrible throw, and then Garrett Cole not covering first base on that play was just inconceivable to me how this can happen. It's one of the worst innings ever played in the history of the World Series, and it came in an elimination game. The Yankees are the only team ever to give up 5 unearned runs in an elimination game, and they all came in the 5th inning and just killed us. I'm sorry, but that's the truth.
We have a Yankee fan in the stands today.
Right. All right, and the game changer is, without being corny about this, it just shows you again how great baseball is. I've tried to tell people this, and not many listen. It's the best game ever, and it always will be, and there is nothing better than October baseball. Game 3 of the Guardians against the Yankees was one of the 5 greatest baseball games I've ever seen. And if it had been a World Series game and an elimination game in the World Series, it might have been the greatest game ever played. That's how amazing that game was. Game 1 of the World Series, one of the greatest games I've ever seen. I probably said that a good 4 or 5 times during the postseason. And the number of times I just slapped my forehead during this postseason saying, how in the world could this happen? Especially in the World Series. I did it at least 20 times. That just shows you the game surprises us. It's so unpredictable, and no season has been more unpredictable than this. And just look at the World Series. I wrote this enormous piece on Aaron Judge against Shohei Ohtani. This is the matchup in the World Series. And what happened? They went 6 for 37 with 1 home run. Granted, Ohtani was hurt for part of that, played through it. But the point is, if this had been LeBron against Michael Jordan in their primes, they both would have averaged 30 points a game in the finals. They both would have controlled each game no matter what. But here, the 2 best players on the planet this year were basically non-factors in the World Series. That's why baseball is the best game, is the 25th guy on the team might decide the game tonight. That can't happen in the NFL or the NBA.
I went to Game 2 of the NLDS for my Philly guys out here, and that was an incredible game, as we know. Nick Castellanos is the hero, tying run in the top of the 9th, bottom of the 9th. It was very intense. And my dad called me afterwards, and he said, well, is that the best playoff game you've ever been to? And this is the beauty of baseball, right? I was at, luckily, Game 7 of the Cubs, then Cleveland Indians, when the Cubs broke the curse in 2016. And it's really hard to beat that because of the levity of what was going on there. But there were so many iconic games. Game 3 in Cleveland will be known as Game 3 forever.
Right. Everyone in Cleveland, all you have to do is just refer to it as Game 3. You don't have to ask for anything else. They'll all know what that means. And I was there for that. It was absolutely breathtaking.
What do you have for on this date in baseball history?
Yeah, we do this every week. And, you know, we always have great things that happen in baseball, but it's November the 5th, so we really have to look for some stuff. So today is Icebox Chamberlain's birthday. He was born in 1867. This is my favorite nickname of Major League history. His nickname was Icebox because he had ice in his veins. He had such courage when he went out to the mound. I actually have to double-check this. And it said here, he had austere calm in the face of all hostility by the enemy. That's how he's referred to. He's a baseball pitcher. He wasn't at the Bridget Remagen, but this is Icebox Chamberlain. So my favorite nicknames are, you know, of these that happened years and years ago. My favorite nickname ever is, do you remember my favorite nickname ever?
Oh, there's so many.
There was a catcher named Doug Goosh.
Oh.
And he spelled his last name Gwosdz. That was his nickname. So his nickname was Eye Chart because it was like you were at the doctor's office and you're reading Gwosdz. So that's Icebox Chamberlain, and that's Doug Goosh. All right, so in 1946, an umpire named Jim Evans was born. He's still alive. He was a great umpire. So one night we go out in Minneapolis. Mark was on the trip with us. This is 1986, and we go into this restaurant bar. And I'm with Mike Flanagan, the late Mike Flanagan, one of the great shooters of all time. And there is a basketball hoop in the bar. So Flanny and I are shooting baskets in the bar. And we're like, sorry, I hate to be self-serving here, but we're running the court because nobody can beat me or Flanny in shooting. And a couple guys get really upset at us. And Jim Evans, who's an umpire at the time, steps in and becomes the umpire and nearly gets into a fight in a bar because we're shooting free throws too well. So that's my Jim Evans story. He's an umpire who almost got in a fight in a bar. All right, last thing today, in 1976, Jim Palmer won his Cy Young Award on this date in 1976. And we had Jim Palmer on the air. It was absolutely fabulous. We loved him, right?
Jim Palmer was amazing. And, you know, he was able to give such good perspective on being a pitcher, but it was even more fun hearing him talk about when his broadcast partner, Kevin Brown, had a Jim Palmer impression. See, these are the things that nobody else is asking about, but Kevin Brown's Jim Palmer impression is spot on.
Right. And Jim Palmer never gave up a grand slam in nearly 4,000 innings pitched. You know, Chano Park gave up 2 in 1 inning. He never gave up one. And when we asked him to explain it, it took him 10 minutes. But he went through every pitch of that day in Cleveland in, 1974. That's his recall on those things.
Now, a little self-serving here, but I'm going to ask it so you don't have to. Obviously, you were a student here at the University of Maryland. What dorm did you stay at?
I lived in Bel Air B for 4 years. I don't even know if it's a dorm anymore.
Is it still a dorm?
Right next to the North Gym, right, yeah.
And that North Gym, you shot a lot of hoops there?
Oh, every day, yeah.
Every day
Yeah.
you would shoot. And
yeah, I played basketball every day in the North Gym for 4 years. I also took basketball 310. It was a 2-credit upper level elective. I'll never forget this. I hope I don't put the university in a bad light. I'm taking a coaching basketball course. And the power forward on the Maryland basketball team took my paper off of my desk and copied all the answers on his paper. He's on the team. How do we run a screen and roll? He took it and copied off of me. I'm like some dorky little guy. Yes, basketball at the North Gym every day.
so we do a best of all Tim every single week. This is a team my dad puts together. And the more obscure, the better, right? We've had the fun with my dad's all Hall of Fame team, the best Hall of Famers. You got to go every position, including bullpen and starting pitchers. But then we've had more goofy ones like the all Eclipse team when the eclipse happened.
That was bad. All fruits and vegetables team. It was a really pointless exercise. But I've been doing this my entire life. So since today is election day, we thought we would have some fun with the all presidents team. So I've got all the presidents' last or first names here, but I'm only using one. I'm not using 4 guys named Washington, all right? So Russ Nixon and Gary Carter are the catchers. Von Hayes and Reggie Jefferson at first. Josh Harrison and Homer Bush, 2 Bushes, at second. Ron Washington is the shortstop. John Kennedy, there was an actual John Kennedy who played third base for the Red Sox in the 60s. He's our third baseman. Craig Monroe, Lou Clinton in the outfield. Willie Wilson's an outfielder. Michael Taylor, Brian Buchanan are our outfielders. Our pitchers, Whitey Ford, Madison Bumgarner, Lefty Tyler, Reggie Cleveland, Babe Adams, Mudcat Grant. And my favorite group are the relievers because Pierce Johnson, who still pitches in the big leagues, he covers 2 presidential names. So does Grant Jackson, 2 names, reliever with the Orioles and Pirates when I was growing up. J.J. Hoover, Brad Lincoln, Jermaine Van Buren, and my favorite, and he's not a president, but there used to be a relief pitcher named Len Whitehouse, which I always got the biggest kick out of. And I talked to him about his bizarre name once, and he was not amused. He didn't think it was funny when I said, oh, all president's team, Len Whitehouse.
So my daughter is McKinley Kurkjian, named after the president, McKinley, and there's a pitcher in the Philadelphia Phillies system named McKinley Moore.
Really?
McKinley Moore, yeah.
There you go.
And a lot of people asked me, did you name it after McKinley Moore? And I said, well, he's a minor league pitcher. Right. All due respect, one day he could be great, but I don't think we're naming him after McKinley Moore.
So if Kamala Harris wins, there are a bunch of Harrises who might have to join. One is, of course, Willie Harris, who in 2008 hit a home run against the Nationals. He was with the Nationals, and Ian Kinsler was playing for the Rangers. So after the game, Ian Kinsler, knowing how much I love all the quirky stats, comes up to me and he goes, you're never going to believe this. I'm the only one that knows this. Willie Harris and I both homered in the same game yesterday, playing the same position, and we have the same birthday. That's never happened before. And I checked it out, and he was right. The second baseman of the Rangers gave me a Kurkjian. So if Kamala Harris wins, then we'll have to put Willie Harris on the team to account for her name.
A bit of a bummer. We did have her scheduled to be our guest this week on Is This a Great Game or What? But she had to cancel. She's been a little bit busy lately. Talk about birthdays. You have to tell them the Kurkjian about your birthday and the pitchers in the Yankees during the World Series.
So I was born on December 10th, and so was Carlos Rodon, who pitched for the Yankees, and he started game 2, and Nestor Cortez also born on December the 10th. So Cortez gave up the homer to Freeman to end the game, and then Rodon started the next game, and they have the same birthday, which is the same birthday as mine. And by the way, Walter Johnson, did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School? Walter Johnson died on December 10th, 1946, and I was born on December 10th, 1956. How spooky is that? How weird is that?
Another connection to WJ
there. You go.
All right. So we have every single week our friends at Stratomatic. They're the market leader in sports simulations. We have them put together a simulation for us. Now, before we get into this, I have to make a correction from last week's sim. So remember we did Judge versus Ohtani. We did a full 9 judges against 9 Ohtanis, 162 games. I royally misread what they had sent us. I thought they were playing against other teams. No, they were playing against each other. Hence why the Ohtani team went under 500. If you had 9 Ohtanis, they're going to win 130 games easily. But in this simulation last week, it actually was the Judge team that beat the Ohtani team.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, right. We were a little baffled at the results of Strat last week, and now it makes a little more sense. They called me and said, hey, we had them play each other for 162 games.
Maybe I should have read it a little closer, too.
Yeah, and that's why Judge had 500 home runs, all 9 of them.
All right, what's this week's sim? We'll have to get this one right.
So with the Dodgers, they obviously are the 2024 World Series champions. We took the 4 best Dodger World Series championship teams and then put them in a bracket style in order to see who would be the best. So we paired the 2024 World Series champions, so this year, against the 1955 World Series championship Dodgers. And ultimately, the 1955 Dodgers are the ones who took that in just 6 games. And then the 81 and the 63 Dodgers ended up playing as well, and the 81 Dodgers against the 55 Dodgers. Now, you haven't seen the sim yet.
Right.
If you took the 1981 Dodgers against the 1955 Dodgers, it went 7 games, so it's hard to predict. Who would you say is the greatest?
Well, there were more Hall of Famers on the 55 Dodger team than there was on the 81 Dodger team.
And you would be right. They won in 7 games.
All right.
Ultimately, Gil Hodges, 4 homers, batted .396 in that World Series sim, and Duke Snider, 4 home runs, batted .400.
And Gil Hodges, who just got into the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, used to live in the neighborhood there in Brooklyn, and he'd like be walking the streets all the time, walking his dog, and people would just say, "Hey, Gil, how you doing?" That can't happen today. There's no way you're walking down the street and here comes Aaron Judge.
Fernando Valenzuela, 2 wins in that series.
Right.
Just lost him last week.
Right.
Or
That
2
was
weeks ago
terrible
now.
loss, Fernando Valenzuela.
Big shout out to Stratomatic, market leader in sports simulations, for helping out with that.
You're interviewing us as opposed to us interviewing Jim Palmer, Johnny Bench, Cal Ripken, whatever. So fire away.
Take a step up to the mic, introduce yourself, your year, your name, and then your question.
Hey guys, I'm Jack Suzanne and I'm a senior here. So first off, you mentioned names regarding presidents, and I think you'd be a really big fan of the current University of Maryland bullpen, where we have Ryan Van Buren and Andrew Johnson.
There you go. This is great. You present something really stupid and you get something else. I love it.
So my actual question, last semester when you came to visit here, we talked about how you told a story during a spring training game about how Jason Hamill and J.J. Hardy were the best ping pong players that you had seen in the clubhouse. So my question is, bouncing off of that, what other clubhouse games are any random major leaguer historically good at?
Well, that's a great question. First off, in spring training last year, Brewster Gratterall, who pitches for the Dodgers, world champion now, I watched him play ping pong, and he was playing with both hands. So he had a paddle in each hand, and he's hitting some left-handed, some right-handed. It was unbelievable. That is the number one game is ping pong. The Orioles now have a pool table in their clubhouse. There are card games going on at all times. Number one rule as a reporter, never, ever interrupt a player's card game. It would be like, Bluto, it would be like Animal House. You guys playing cards? No, you can't do that kind of stuff. So, yes, cards are a big thing. And in the Cleveland clubhouse all those years, Terry Francona used to play cribbage with his players. He and Dustin Pedroia played cribbage every day. And then Josh Tomlin joined. So one year, Jonathan Papelbon, who wasn't a very good cribbage player, said, "Can I be in on the game?" And he was so bad, because they play for money, that Terry Francona told me, he built a new basement in my house with all the money that I won off of Jonathan Papelbon because he didn't know how to play cribbage yet. So, great question.
Thank you.
All right, step on up. We got a Detroit Lions fan here.
Of course. Hi, my name's Laura. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm the hugest Detroit Tigers fan in the world. So my question is, there's a good friend of ours named Aaron Arnstein, who is a huge A's fan. And unfortunately, his team is moving from Oakland to Las Vegas. So do you think the A's will do well in Las Vegas? Will they turn things around?
Well, Jeff, your in-laws live in Las Vegas. So
I did radio in Las Vegas for almost 5 years. I lived there. I met my wife there. She's born and raised out there. And I have to say, I was there when the Raiders got there. I was there when the Golden Knights had just started their first season. So I've got a unique perspective. The fans in Las Vegas, they love the Golden Knights because they're Vegas-born. And think of what you will about Las Vegas. They have an incredibly strong, united, local vibe because, all of the people who work there, live there, and service all of us who go party there, right? So they all have that common ground of being able to be working in the service industry. I was saddened to see how little the Raiders were embraced at first, and if you still watch a Raiders game, there's a whole lot of visiting teams there. However, I feel as if there's a difference when it comes to baseball coming. They have the AAA team there, the Aviators, and they are loved. I mean, they've had the 51s before then. They became the Aviators in Summerlin, and so I believe that they will have a successful time in Las Vegas. I don't love the choice of where the stadium's being built, though. Locals don't want to go to Las Vegas Boulevard and go to the Strip, but they proved that wrong with where they built T-Mobile Arena for the Golden Knights. So hopefully, after they've now plowed down the Flamingo, they can have a successful time playing on Las Vegas Boulevard. But I'm a little skeptical to see, after seeing how they embrace the Raiders, if they'll embrace another team moving from California.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a Tiger fan. So I did the Tigers against the Astros on TV for the wild card. So I use this on this date in history. For one of the games, on this date in history, 50 years ago, Al Kaline, the second greatest Tiger ever, had announced his retirement. He got 3,000 hits. He's the second greatest right fielder defensively I've ever seen after Roberto Clemente. So I take 20 seconds on the broadcast, 20 seconds, to explain to the Tiger fans, 50 years ago on this date, the great Al Kaline announced his retirement. The next day on Twitter, some guy writes in that I ruined the broadcast for him for bringing up Al Kaline. He goes, I don't care about Al Kaline. You ruined the broadcast for me. It was a 3-hour game. I took 20 seconds with the Tiger fans to explain how great Al Kaline was, and I ruined the day for him. So sorry. This is what Twitter can do to you.
Hey guys, my name is Michael. I'm graduating in December. So first, I'm surprised Grover Cleveland Alexander wasn't on the presidential pitching list. That was one I was like sure that was going to be on there. So 2 questions for you. One a real question and one kind of a goofy question. The first one being the real one is that I'm going into the job market starting now. I'm starting to apply to jobs and things, and I'm like kind of scared to maybe do my own thing, kind of based on like if I wanted to do some social media things, say I'm scared of how people who I know or people who don't know me may perceive me. So if there was ever a time in your career where you kind of felt like a little about something, how is that something that you got over?
Well, that's a great question. I went on TV really for the first time at age 40. So I'm starting all over. I've gone from print to TV, even though I never left print. I've been a writer my entire life. I'll be a writer for the rest of my life. But going on TV for the first time was really difficult. I mean, first off, I spent a fortune on clothes. I wore more makeup than my wife, and I spent a lot of time walking around in a circle talking to myself. It was not pleasant, but I figured out how to do it. But yes, you just got to fight your way through it and say, this is what I got to do. This is the new game. And Jeffrey, it's a different game now, right? With young people out there looking for jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I graduated in 2015 from college, and I totally understand how you're feeling. I think the one piece of advice, and I go back and I advise students who are just like you and helping them out. Number one thing is do something that sets you apart, right? Doing a podcast. I mean, our little setup here, our little baby setup took me a couple years to build, but I mean, a microphone, you can plug right into your computer and you're done. I mean, you have a podcast. You just got to do it. And I think what makes it really difficult for young people, myself included, is like they always say, "Oh, I mean, everybody has a podcast." Well, yeah, but if you don't, then you're one of the people who doesn't have a podcast or whatever it is, whether it's an account like a buddy of mine who is going to be graduating soon. I've been mentoring him. He does a TikTok just about the teams that he cares about. And he goes very niche into the team. So if you love the Yankees, go talk about the Yankees. And you don't need to be hot take. You don't need to be the guy yelling about everything. You can go in deep. As long as there's a niche audience that wants to hear, just start doing it and it'll set you apart.
And remember, Vince Scully, the greatest play-by-play man ever, once said, the only thing that will separate you from the others is you. So you have to be yourself. You can take tips and watch the pros work, but in the end, you have to be yourself.
I'm going to print that out and put that on my wall. Thank you. I like that quote. So the second question's a goofy one. You yourself kind of took it from me earlier. I wanted to spring SVP on you and how that kind of started, because that's like, strangely enough, it's like a comfort clip of mine. If I need to laugh, I pull that clip up all the time. So how did you and SVP start the whole, the O's thing for the Baltimore O's?
Well, first off, we're both from Montgomery County, and so we both grew up about 50 miles from Baltimore, and I love Baltimore, but they speak a different language in Baltimore, and the long O is the one. So the first one, I know he threw out Kiko Garcia on the air on his radio show, and I just burst into tears, and that was the start of the whole thing. But it's gotten so big now that I was in the Safeway not too long ago, and this guy like tackles me in the Safeway and says, he doesn't even say hello. He goes, "Can you please ask Scott Van Pelt to tell you who the women's goalie on the soccer team is?" And of course, it's Hope Solo. So he does it, and we laugh uproariously. We're allowed to have a good laugh at this. I was getting a sandwich once not too long ago, and the guy in front of me, I think he must have recognized me. He's ordering a sandwich, and the guy behind the counter goes, "What kind of cheese do you want?" And he turns around and he looks at me, and he goes, provolone. So I think he ordered a specific cheese just to get a rise out of me. And then he took his sandwich and he went home. This is how it works. And I think this just... I got a tweet from a text from somebody, and Steve Kerr comes on and goes, I can't wait to watch Joe Flacco start this week for the Colts. So now I got Steve Kerr doing SVP on the air. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, we talked about how we had SVP and he came off the beach. Was he in Ocean City at the time?
He was down to Ocean.
Down to Ocean, for sure. Right. Thank you so much for your question. Oh, we've got a good counsel graduate coming up from Montgomery County, another MoCo guy.
Stefan Diggs went to good counsel, yes.
Stefan Diggs. I'm Danny, a freshman and a good counsel graduate. And I guess my question for you guys is, what's the best ballpark food that you guys have had the chance to try?
All right. First off, I get asked this a lot, and I eat in the press box all the time. I don't go down into the crowd because they have press box food for us. So I'll have to answer with the best press box food I've ever had. And I've been to the concession stand there, is the bratwurst in Milwaukee with the secret sauce. And they used to serve those in the press box during the game. And occasionally I would eat 4 bratwursts during the course of a game, and I weigh 140 pounds. So it just tells you how great they were. How about you?
A Dodger dog. I think some people think it's overrated. I think it is rated perfectly. It is famous. It is delicious. It's hard to mess up a hot dog, but something in Los Angeles they do differently. Mine's got to be a Dodger dog.
Hi, my name is Ryan Martin. I'm a sophomore here. Thanks so much for being here, Tim and Jeff. I wanted to go back earlier when you were talking about asking athletes questions to take them out of the ballpark and see what they're really like. Jeff said, Tim, for you, that was based on a bunch of years of really getting to know the sport. But you have to start somewhere. And you mentioned starting with Mark Hyman, our director of the Povich Center in Baltimore with the Orioles. Do you have a story covering the Orioles clubhouse where you realize that they're just a 20-something-year-old athlete, just as you are a young reporter covering, that made you rethink how athletes really are and trying to get that deeper story?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, my answer to that question is not a good one, because I wrote a story on Rick Burleson in 1987. He was the second baseman, and he shared the job with Alan Wiggins, and those two didn't get along. So he tore into Alan Wiggins so badly in this story, and I wrote every word of it, and I wrote it correctly. And then he looks at me and he goes, now don't play this, don't make a big deal out of this story. And I had to tell him, Rick, I can't help it. I'm going to send this in, and they're going to play it like they play it. So the next night, I go to the ballpark, because I go to the ballpark every day. Good lesson. When you're critical of anybody, you have to show up the next day. So if they have something to say to you, you're standing right there. The worst thing you can do is write something really critical and then not show up for 2 weeks or a month. Then you're really in trouble. Rick Burleson screamed at me so loud for 2 minutes because he didn't like the way that our story made a big deal out of his comments. They were inflammatory comments. They deserve to be on the front page of the sports section, and he absolutely crushed me with everybody watching. I thought he was going to hit me. I did, and he didn't, thank God, and I've since had a discussion with him about that, and I'll never forget this either. Mike Flanagan, the late, great Mike Flanagan, after it was all over, he just walked by me and he said, "Are you okay?" That's what he said. A player said that to a writer. That never happens. But he saw what happened. He recognized what was going on. He recognized it was probably way over the top. But that's a moment where I'll never forget in the clubhouse, even though I would love to forget that. But that's going to happen to you once in a while. If you write something, as long as it's fair and as long as it's accurate, you really shouldn't have much to worry about. But boy, did he scream at me.
Hi, my name is Michael. I am a junior here, also a good counsel graduate.
Wow. All right. Another Montgomery County.
Yes. I wanted to ask about the late Pete Rose. Even with his passing, he's still ineligible for the Hall of Fame due to being on that permanently ineligible list. With players like Pete, and then also you can throw in Shoeless Joe Jackson, do you think that that should extend past their death, or that do they have a spot in the Hall of Fame?
So many years ago, probably 15 years ago, I was asked on SportsCenter, would you vote for Pete Rose for the Hall of Fame if he were eligible? And with great hesitation, I said, yes, I would vote for him, because I would be voting for him as a player, not as a manager. and all the violations that we seem to know are him as a manager. So I say this on SportsCenter. Frank Robinson I see the next day, and he screams at me. And I know Frank Robinson, and he knows me. We get along. And I finally said, Frank, what are you so mad about? And he said, you said that you would put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. He said he violated the number one rule. You do not bet on baseball. And he said, if he ever gets in the Hall of Fame, I will never go back to the Hall of Fame for any reason. And Frank really loved Pete as a player, but talked about the violation that he made. So the answer to the question is, I don't see Pete Rose getting in the Hall of Fame anytime soon. Rob Manfred, the commissioner, has to leave. A new commissioner has to come in and say, we're going to reopen this. But then it's still going to be up to the Hall of Fame to decide if Pete Rose is going to be on a ballot. They're not just going to put him in. He has to go through the process of being on a ballot. I get asked this question every single time I ever make a speech. It's usually one of the first five questions I get asked. And now that he has passed, it gets asked even more. So his timing as a player was impeccable. His timing in retirement has been terrible. And that's, I think, going to keep him out of the Hall of Fame for quite some time. But they never took his hits away. They never took his records away. And everybody knows he's one of the greatest players of all time.
Hey, guys. My name is Justin Corman. I'm a freshman here at Maryland. Thank you guys for doing this.
Of course.
Being a Marlins fan, I'm from Miami, can be rough at some times. I would love to know your guys' opinion on how do you think smaller market teams, just like the Marlins, can compete with the Dodgers, the Yankees, these bigger market teams, and do you think the MLB should implement a salary cap?
All right, Jeff, you take this because you lived in Cleveland for a while, so you watched it.
I think it's tough, especially with this past World Series, right? A lot of people were turned off when it comes to, wow, look at how much money these guys are spending. When you're reading things like, wow, 3 guys on the Yankees are making more money than the entire Cleveland roster has made this year. So when you think about that, it does make an argument, and it does make it difficult, and fans are turned off when you're a fan of a team that doesn't spend a lot of money. But when you see movies like Moneyball, as silly as it sounds, there's an art form when it comes to being able to work with what you've got. And there's also a big part of this is just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean the players are going to get along with each other. You know, you can bring in all the best guys, but if you have too many stars, respectfully, and you've got too many egos, 162 games is a long year. You can't just sit your guys and say, all right, now it's your time to shine. So living in Cleveland, it was really neat to be able to see how they were able to lose Francisco Lindor, their star, and be able to make up for it with guys in and around them.
Yeah, baseball is not going to have a salary cap for a long, long time. This is why we've had work stoppages. This is why we've had strikes. And it's because the union is saying we are not going to put in something artificial like that is going to suppress salaries. But it's clear that the system is broken, that some team can have a $350 million payroll and another team has a $50 million payroll. There's something wrong with that.
I'm Daniel Stein. I'm a sophomore here, and I'm from Chicago. So between the Cubs and the Bears and the Bulls, it's been kind of a rough go lately. So my question for you guys is, when you're reporting on underperforming teams, how do you balance talking about maybe like a reflection of frustration from the fans or the team itself, and how do you balance that with more lighter stories and things that aren't so depressing, basically?
Just be happy you're not a White Sox fan. Yeah. At least you're a Cubs fan.
Yeah, it's really hard to do. Now, I covered the Orioles in 1988 for the Baltimore Sun, and of course, if you remember, they lost their first 21 games. So that was a challenge of all challenges to write about 21 consecutive losses, which demolished the previous record of 14 straight losses to start a season. So we needed to keep our sense of humor through that, at the same time acknowledging that this has never happened in the history of baseball. So after loss number 18, Frank Robinson, who Mark knew so well, Frank invites the writers to go out to dinner in Minneapolis. It had never happened before, never happened afterwards. I think he just needed some support from somebody. So we're about halfway through dinner, And I say to Frank, who was a big kidder, by the way, I said, Frank, anyone interesting called you during this streak? You're 0-18. And he goes, yeah, the president called me today. So I said, Frank, I mean it. Did anyone interesting call you recently? And I pressed him like 3 times, and he said, damn it, the president of the United States called me today. I said, Frank, what did he say? He said, Frank, I know what you're going through. And Frank said, Mr. President, you got no idea what I'm going through. So that's the only way to get through difficult spots like that. You have to enter the clubhouse every day knowing they don't want to talk to me today because of the history that they're making. Scott McGregor, who Mark knows very well, he came up to me once after 14 in a row because now all the national media is there. And he says, why don't these people just go home? I said, Scotty, you just got to win one game and they'll all go home. So that was a great test for a writer like myself to try to tell the story every day, ask similar questions every day, and do it without having somebody take a swing at me. But you got to report the truth. You got to tell the truth. You got to be fair and accurate. As long as you do that, you'll be fine. But yes, some humor has to be involved.
Hey guys, I'm Jake Cotter. I'm a sophomore here at Maryland. I was just wondering, so I was lucky enough to have the experience to attend some MLB games as a press member myself over the summer. I know especially early on, my sports editor helped me a lot, figuring out all the intricacies, introducing me to other press members. Just, Tim, did you have a mentor early on like that in your career who helped you out?
Yeah, I had several, but Dan Shaughnessy, who works for the Boston Globe and is the best daily columnist in America as far as I'm concerned, and a Hall of Fame baseball writer, was the baseball writer at the Washington Star when I first joined there in 1978. And I already told you, you have to do things your way because the only thing that separates you from everyone else is you. But you can watch the way the pros do it. And the greatest experience I've ever had was going to work at the Washington Star and watching those reporters work. I listened to the questions they asked. I watched the way that they wrote their story. I would go to a game with Dan Shaughnessy, and I would cover the same game as him, but his story went in the paper, and I would go home afterwards and write the same story based on everything that he had said. I just tagged around with him, and I had a completely different story. And his story was way better than mine. So I watched and I learned. I watched and I learned. And from that experience is absolutely critical. What you're doing here at Maryland is absolutely crucial to you moving forward. But when you get out there, you need to watch the way that other people do their jobs. Like we had a guy named Steve Guback who was our football writer at the Washington Star. So I asked him, I covered a game with him a couple times. I did like a sidebar. He wrote the game story. So I said, Steve, do you want to go eat lunch before the game? And he goes, oh, I don't eat on game days. That's how intense he was. I don't eat on game days. And after the game is almost over, so we're all getting together to determine who's going to write what story afterwards. And he said, I'll cover the people. Like, I'll talk to everyone. Like, you guys do whatever you want, but I'm talking to everyone on the team. We were wondering, what should we interview the helmets or what? Because you're talking to all the people. But yeah, there's an intensity to it, and you can learn an awful lot just by watching the pros do their jobs.
Hey guys, I'm Eddie. I'm a junior here at Maryland, and my question is on, we've talked a lot about the international presence coming to baseball. Shohei Ohtani, a big part of the World Series. There were a lot of broadcasts that outdrew audience from Japan into the U.S. What are your thoughts on just the growing worldwide? And they were handing out newspapers of his face. That did not happen here. So what do you think of the presence?
Well, sadly, I've never been to Japan, but a bunch of my friends have, and they say it's so crazy for baseball, you have no idea. Bobby Valentine told me, we had him on our pod, he told me 20 years ago that every everyday player in Japan could make a major league team. So if anyone questions how good they play the game, how well they play the game over there, they play it exceptionally well. Now, Shohei is an outlier. Yamamoto is an outlier. Ichiro Suzuki was an outlier. However, there are so many good players over there, and their love of baseball is bigger than the love that we have here. There was some ridiculous number, 9.5 million people watched Game 1 of the World Series, Game 2, because Yamamoto and Ohtani were in it, we can learn a lesson from the Japanese about how you support the game, how you love the game. And Bobby Valentine said an interesting thing, Jeff, when we interviewed him about why don't more people come over here and play. He said, what did he say? You remember? He said, why would they?
Why would they? I mean, there's stars there, right? And have you seen the videos of a high school baseball game in Japan? I've never seen you see high school football games here in Texas, and they're unbelievable, right? Why would you go to Japan to play football? Why would you go to the United States to play baseball? Major League Baseball is amazing, of course. But when you see those high school Japanese games and they're in Major League Baseball-sized stadiums, they clearly love the game. And these guys say, well, maybe I don't want to go over there.
Right. They are so revered over there. They get paid exceptionally well over there. So, again, that's what Bobby said. Why would you leave? Well, you leave so you can be Shohei Ohtani and win the World Baseball Classic by striking out Mike Trout and then win the World Series in a 2-year period.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. Thank you guys for setting us up. And now, officially, you're part of the family. So thank you for being a part of the family. Much appreciated.
Go Terps.